I'm Sue Starfield. I work here at the Learning Centre, and with Helen Drury, my colleague at Sydney Learning Centre. I'm sure you all know Helen. We're really happy to welcome you here. I should just start with the acknowledgement of country, that we are here today on the Gadigal land of the Eora people at UNSW, and it's always been a place of learning. I'm really, really happy to welcome Sheena Gardner from the University of Birmingham, who's travelled here on a Universitas 21 fellowship. And we're really grateful to you, Sheena, for agreeing to do this session with us. We know you're not here for very long. We really appreciate it. I don't know if any of you have had a chance to look at the corpus or try and use it, but I think it's going to be a really, really interesting morning. Sheena's got, I won't spend too long talking about you because you can just Google her and read all about her on her webpage. Sheena was at the University of Warwick, where she worked on this funded project to develop the online writing corpus, British academic writing corpus, which is quite a unique set of student undergraduate. It's undergraduate, isn't it?
And first year postgraduate, taught masters.
Student writing across a range of genres and disciplines. So I think it's going to be really interesting for us. I'd like to thank the All Association, AALL, for sponsoring this day for us. We've got lovely lunch and tea as a result of that. Thank you very much. And Bronwyn James, our president, is here, and she's going to talk a little bit later in the morning. And also that's enabled us to video the event, and it will be streamed on the All website. So if you have colleagues who weren't able to be here today, you'll be able to go back and tell them that the talk is available. I'd also just like to thank this fantastic team at the Learning Centre. Many of you would have been in contact with Mary, who's put it all together superbly, and Val, and of course Pam Mort, my colleague, who's been fantastic. And I might just stop at this point and hand over to Sheena. Thank you very much. I think you're going to talk for about an hour. Then we'll have a little break. And during that break, we might ask you how many people did bring a laptop? Oh, fantastic. So we might ask you to try and log in, just to see if that's all working, and then...
If not, then
we'll work around that. And everyone should also have one of these folders with the handout, so make sure if you don't have one, they're out on the table. Does anyone have any questions? Okay, good. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sue. Thank you for your warm welcome. It's lovely to be here. It's my first time in Australia, my first time in Sydney, so I'm very excited to explore everything, and I'm really pleased to be able to talk to so many of you. Thanks to all for arranging it, and to Sue and Helen for inviting me and everyone. What you'll need, the session's basically in 3 hours, and so for this first hour, you'll need just the first handout in your pack that starts off exploring university student writing through the Ball corpus. And what I want to do in this first hour is to explain to you what's in the corpus, how it was developed, what its intention was, and what there is and what there isn't. Because if you go in thinking, oh, I'll be able to find out lots about biomechanics, then you'll be disappointed. Everything's not there. And then in the second hour, then we'll have a short break. And then in the second hour, what I want to do is to show you some of the things that you can do with the corpus. And I'll demonstrate those here. So I'll be doing that, and you'll be able to see the kinds of searches, the kinds of investigations that you can do with some examples on the corpus. And then we'll have lunch. And then after lunch, I've got some worksheets and some activities that you can try yourselves. So you have a chance to go in and explore and see what you can find and see if it will be useful for you and for your students. So as Sue said, that this was a funded project. We started with a pilot corpus and before that, and then from 2004 to 2007 we were funded, and that's when we did most of the work. But we're still working on it. We have plans to do more development this summer, and we've really moved into the materials development phase. So the funded research was to develop the corpus, and now we want it to be used. So we're very keen to hear from people if they have ideas, if they have that they like to consider, if they're using it themselves, how they're doing, and we're starting to move into that phase. The aim of the project was first of all to develop a corpus of British academic written English. Secondly, to characterize the types of writing, the genre of writing across the disciplines and across years of study. And we wanted to focus on proficient student writing assessed in the disciplines. So we didn't look at multiple choice questions, we didn't look at exams, we looked at undergraduate student writing, and we didn't look at PowerPoints and oral presentations. So it's not a full picture of all the assessment, it's just a picture of assessed writing at British universities. In terms of their methodology, we approached it from a number of different perspectives, and I'm going to talk about a few of these today. First of all, we did an investigation of the disciplinary context, and I'll talk about that. And the main aim of that was to understand where the writing was coming from, what the nature of the writing was, its purposes, and so on. Secondly, we actually collected the assignments and developed the digital corpus, and I'll talk about that and its nature. Thirdly, once we had all the assignments, we developed a genre classification to describe the assignments across the disciplines and years of study, and I'll talk about that. We also had Doug Biber come in and do a multidimensional analysis. Does that mean anything to any of you? Couple. I'm not actually going to talk about that today. That's more a register analysis, and that's a whole other talk and presentation. But that's an ongoing strand of the research as well. And then we sort of counted anything and everything that could be counted in the student assignment writing. So even a basic question, such as, how long is a second-year history essay, could have 5 different answers depending on the perspective that you were coming from. So in the department, they would think of it as a 2,000-word essay. But from a corpus perspective, it might actually be much longer because you'd have front pages and back pages and appendices which weren't included in the word count. From a genre perspective, it might in fact include more than one essay, although in the case of history essays it didn't. There might be 2 genres in there. From the multidimensional analysis, we just looked at the body of the assignments, so we didn't take all the extra part of the assignments, and we just looked at the language. And we would take out things like quotes that weren't the students' own language, but were block quotes or figures or diagrams or tables. Those were all taken out. So even a simple question like that could have 5 different answers, as it were. So first of all, the account of the disciplinary context. I should explain the British context because it's probably quite different from the Australian context. The assignments were all collected in England, so the English context is different from that of Scotland or Wales, where it's bilingual and so on. And there are national guidelines for university education in England. So there are national benchmarks, national subject guidelines for each of the discipline, each of the department areas. There are specific guidelines that say what should be taught at each different level. And within that, there are university guidelines for assessment. And what was popular at the time that we collected the data was something called PPD. Does that mean anything to any of you? It's personal and professional development. So there was a lot of emphasis on students reflecting on their own learning and developing the skills that they would need for employment. So that comes through in the data to some extent. And now we've moved on to graduate attributes. So, there are these sort of phases in higher education where things are popular. So at that time it was PPD. We looked at departmental documentation, tutor interviews, student interviews, assignments. In terms of what happens in schools in Britain, at age 16, children do GCSEs, and they might do 10, 11, this is in England rather, GCSEs. And then they move on to A-levels, which is a 2-year program. And normally for university entrance, you only need 3 A-levels. So for 2 years, you're studying 3 subjects in depth. So you might do double English and French. You might do double maths and physics. So already when you come to university, you're quite specialized. And then when you come to university, you might do maths or you might do English. And you would stay in that department for most of your courses. So what we're getting a picture of here is very much disciplinary writing by people who've been embedded in the disciplines mostly for quite a long time and who are not really exploring other disciplines. And that's what we're aiming to capture. There are interdisciplinary courses in Britain, but we didn't focus on those. We wanted to get the core disciplines and to sort of have a picture of those. And what we did was we went into each department and we said, we'd like to talk to someone who likes teaching. We'd like to talk to someone who has experience of teaching at different levels of undergraduate and postgraduate, who's been involved in the development of curriculum and in assessment and so on. And we'd find someone like that, and we'd interview them and we'd ask them about the assessment, about what the assignments were set at each level, how the modules were integrated, what were the core modules, what were the optional modules, what the developments they expected to see over an undergraduate degree and into the first year taught masters, what they valued, what counted as evidence, how the students were trained in the discipline and so on. And we'd use that person as a main resource, and then we'd interview another couple of people who were involved in other aspects of the teaching. We also interviewed students, and then when we collected the assignments, we asked for information about the assignments in terms of, and you'll see that in a minute. So in terms of our investigations of the context, these are the kinds of comments that we'd get. In year 4, they have a team project with tasks similar to what they'll get in employment. So we were looking at the assignments and what models students might have for their assignments. They worked in teams with students from a range of engineering disciplines to tackle very complex engineering problems. They produce a document with costings targeted at a venture capital company. So again, the audience is there for the assignment. There's a standard structure. They have a layout of headings and a description of the sorts of things that would go under each of those headings, and they map whatever they've done onto that. And the headings that he was talking about would be things like introduction, methods, results, discussions, the typical kind of experimental report type headings. So although a third-year project might be similar in structure, IMRD structure, to a lab report written in the first year, the writer will have to assimilate, evaluate, and integrate a wider range of information. And this was a consistent difference that we found across disciplines, that a lab report typically focused on the methods and the results section of the assignment, whereas a research report written in the final year, the students would have to do a literature search, develop the questions themselves. So the introduction with the theory was much a larger component, and they'd have to show in the end how their findings were integrated back into the literature, and so the discussion was much larger. So it was, even though on their sort of macro structures were the same, the actual assignment was quite different in nature. Students, we asked students similar sorts of questions and tried to get their understanding of what they were doing. Basically, we make a summary first. The reasons are, if someone in industry wants to know what we're doing, they haven't got time to read through, they just want to know what's going on. Then the introduction, contents, then a theory, which takes a huge chunk, and you get all these lovely explanations of assignments. Doesn't matter how good the project is, if it isn't well written, it won't get good marks. From the sciences, they were very aware of the importance of writing. History students, these are people, as I say, who've been doing essays at school intensively and proceed to do more essays at university, and we tried to understand how they approached them. I tried to use different opinions. I say someone else's opinion. I say someone's opinion, then counter it with someone else's. I weave my own perception in, but I'd never say, this is what I think directly. I use some arguing and counter, but I always go back to my introduction stance. So you can see the idea of a thesis statement and sort of weaving their way through, and then conclusion with that at the end. I put across my argument, and A, you have to consider the popular argument at the time, so an awareness that you have to include the sort of popular argument. You don't want to go against the flow completely, as you don't have the skill to do that, so the student positioning. But B, I consider what the professor will think. And these were all recurring themes. You had to know what who the professor was, what their area of research was, what kind of writing that they liked, and how to address that. You had to consider your position as a student. You had to sort of be sufficiently respectful and demonstrating what you knew, rather than assuming that the reader would know that you knew it. And you had to take into account the popular argument. So it's all quite useful in terms of how the essays were written. So from this investigation of the disciplinary context, we got an understanding of the assignment purposes, the audiences, the structures, the relationship between genre, both within the academy and external to the academy, what counted as evidence, the sort of values, and basically the thinking behind the writing. In the 3 universities, we interviewed about 50 faculty in each. So that was the first part of the project. And then we developed the corpus. Now, it's easy to say we collected the assignments, but it was very difficult to do. It was, in the pilot corpus, we managed to collect a lot of assignments from psychology and from particular disciplines, but it was very difficult to get them from other disciplines where people saw their work as their intellectual property and didn't want to share it. And we offered an incentive of £3, and the business students would say, well, my work's worth much more than £3. And so getting a balanced corpus was really a challenge, and that was our aim. And we had all kinds of strategies. We had the netball team got involved, and they did fundraising for netball and all sorts of things. One of the reasons it was tricky was because at that time we weren't using electronic submission, which we are now. It would be much easier now, I think, to develop an electronic corpus, because all you'd have to do is to put on, when students submit their assignment, all you'd have to do is to put on a little disclaimer saying, you know, I agree for my assignment to be used for research purposes. And then you could kind of pick from the whole range. But we didn't have that only 5 years ago. So we collected the assignments, and I'll explain the composition of the corpus in a minute. And then each of the files, the assignments were submitted electronically, and each of the files had to be cleaned up and tagged. And the corpus is now available at the Oxford Text Archive. So if you're doing research and if you want to, you can request permission to download it. Obviously, it's a collection of assignments, which is a very valuable resource in the state of essay banks and so on. And if you're doing research, that'll be fine, and you'll receive it, and then you can use the corpus and you can analyze it yourself with Wordsmith tools or with AntConc or any of those other corpus programs. And we also arranged for an interface for end users, and this is what we're going to look at today. The corpus has been lodged in Sketch Engine, so we can use the Sketch Engine interface to interrogate the corpus, and that's, as I say, what we'll be doing today. You can use it freely, your students can use it freely. That's available to anyone. In terms of the composition of the corpus, we were informed by Bigland's six-way analysis of disciplinary writing, of the disciplines, thinking in the disciplines. So we aimed for a balance of pure and applied. We aimed for a balance of life and non-life, and we aimed for a balance of hard and soft disciplines. I'm not going to explain all those now, but this is what we ended up with. So these are our main corpus disciplines across 4 disciplinary groups: arts and humanities, life sciences, physical sciences, social sciences. And the composition of the corpus is on page 2 of your handout. So for instance, if we were collecting from the classics department, we would aim to collect a similar number of assignments. We were aiming for 28 in each of the boxes. We actually got 33 in first year, 27 in second year, 15 in third year, but only 7 in fourth year. So we have a total of 82 assignments from classics. 1, 2, and 3 is basically first year, second year, third year undergraduate, and 4 is basically first year taught masters. We included student undergraduate projects because they receive very little, they're relatively short, and they receive relatively little supervision. We didn't include master's dissertations because those are generally studied with PhD theses in that area. So you have a sort of general breakdown of the corpus on your handout. This more specific breakdown of the corpus is available on the Coventry website. Most of the information about the BAW corpus is now on the Coventry website, coventry.ac.uk/BAW. The website's here, I can tell it to you afterwards. So important if you're looking for disciplines to check what's actually available in the boxes that you're looking for. In terms of the corpus as a whole, we did reasonably well, I think, in having a good balance of the 4 disciplinary groups and the 4 levels of study. So most of those boxes are reasonably substantial. 255 in first year arts and humanities, for instance. These are assignments. 207 in fourth year social sciences, and so on. There's always a trade-off between the number of assignments and the number of words. So the higher the level of study, the longer the assignments are, the more words. So you don't need quite as many assignments to reach the number of words. But if you look along the number of words, you'll see that those are also fairly well balanced. Sort of about 1.5 million in each, with a total of 6,500 words in the corpus as a whole. And then for each file, for each assignment, we included information in the corpus about the writer, about their age, their first language, their gender, their schooling, their course. In terms of schooling, what we wanted to know is whether they had been through the English education system for all of their high school, or whether they'd come from overseas. So it says UKA, which means that they were schooled in the UK entirely, UK all, or OSA, which is overseas all, or you'll have how many years they were at school in the UK. In terms of their module, it says the title, the department, the disciplinary group. In terms of the assignment, the level, the date, the grade. We aimed for proficient student writing, so they all received over 60, and it says if it's a distinction or a merit, which is merit is 60 to 70, distinction is 70 and above. And that's still a good. You know, there are people who you pass an undergraduate degree, you pass at 40%. So 60% is a good mark. The number of words, the number of sentences, the number of paragraphs, if there are tables, figures, quotes, formulae, lists, an abstract, the number of words per sentence, the number of sentences per paragraph, anything that we could kind of easily count, or the computer could easily count, we included in the corpus. And then we also added the genre family. The corpus has also been tagged for parts of speech, so you can search for nouns or verbs or adjectives, and it's been tagged for semantic categories, so you can search for abstract categories or psychological categories and concrete entities and so on. The semantic tags are the Ukrael, the Lancaster tags, and the pause tags is also from Lancaster using the clause system. There's there's more information than anyone could ever use, I think, in there. In terms of actually accessing it, so this is through the open corpora, this is what you could do with your students. You basically just go to Sketch Engine, type in thesketchengine.co.uk, and we'll do that this afternoon. There we are. So if you go to Open Corpora, so these are the freely available corpora. You'll see 4 corpora. That we also have a corpus of spoken academic English. That's the base corpus, which has lectures and seminars. But BAW is the written one. Click on BAW. It's coming all the way from Britain. And then there are expert options you can see down the left, or you can just put in a simple query. So if we were doing something on reporting verbs, you could put in mention and click. And it'll bring you up concordance lines from the corpus which use mention. So you can see that this is giving you the lemmas. It's not just mention, it's also mentioned, mentions, mentioning. And if you look at how it's used, let me move it along a wee bit. Even just by looking there, you get a sense of it, that I mentioned previously, that the author's mention, as mentioned earlier, as mentioned before, as mentioned above. So for a student wanting to find out how mentioned is used, you get a sense, okay, I use mention when it's something that happened that I talked about before. So it's quite useful just from looking at that. But if you look at the top left-hand side, you'll see that there are 1,381 hits. That means there are 1,381 lines. Well, you can't go through all of those. So you have to, and I'll show you in a minute what you can do to sort of crystallize that. If you click on mention in the middle line, come on, there we are, you get a longer quote, and then you can expand left or expand right to see more of the text where it's come from. I'll just close that. If you click on the left-hand column, where it says here it's viewing the disciplinary group, social studies, arts and humanities, life sciences, it'll tell you more information about the assignment. So this is from social sciences, it's from sociology, it's from someone who was educated entirely in the UK, it's from an essay genre, it's from a male whose first language is English. It's a first-year assignment. Oh no, sorry. Text grade is M. That's a merit. So there's merit and distinction. Merit is the slightly lower one. First language is English. It's a first-year assignment written by a woman, age under 25. Mostly we were interested in whether they were mature students or had come straight from school. So under 25 means come straight from school. And you go down and there's more information about where it occurs in the assignment, when it was written, the title of the assignment, discuss the implications, and so on. So as I say, more information than you would probably need in most instances, but it is there. So you can also, in order to find out what mention generally occurs with, you can look at collocations, where it co-locates. And if you're into statistics, you can play with all of these. I usually generally use the sort of default one. -5 or +5 means it co-locates with words before it or after it, to the left and to the right, but we might as well do both and see what happens. And here we see what we had guessed from looking at those first couple of lines, that it collocates with above, earlier, previously, as, already. So we get, and then if you click on P, which is where these are present, you'll see actual examples of it collocating with of, as mentioned above, as I have mentioned above, as above mentioned, and so on. So you can sort of explore that. And then you could do the same with claim and with argue and other reporting verbs and find the sort of differences between them. Should I do claim? How would you think claim would be used? This is where you can test your intuitions. Anyone brave enough to say anything? As a projection. Yeah. Good guess, or good, not guess, good educated response. Bulmer claims that, he claims that. So we've clearly got the projections in there, haven't we? Coleman claims, Leonard agrees, claiming, Maycomb claims. So what do you notice about that? Very different from mentions. It's someone else, isn't it? Somebody else claims, yeah.
And so different claiming. I mean, some is the reporting verb and others is like claiming benefits.
So there could be claiming benefits, and you'll find legal claims. The computer is a bit stupid. It doesn't really know the difference between claiming benefits, you know, a legal claim and a reporting claim. The semantic sorting does sort it to some extent. You could show nouns and verbs, and that would give you some of them. But you have to sort of just, you know, work with it and see what comes up. So in terms of collocations there, we might expect, what is my, that. And then what you could do, you could look at the collocations just in sociology or look at the collocations just in engineering, and you would get examples typical to that specific discipline. If you were working with students from a number of different disciplines, they could each look at their own discipline and find out if there were any differences. So there we've got the projection, the that, the he claims, this is academic writing, false, interesting, false claims, who claims, and so on. So you're getting a sense of how that's used. Support a claim, make a claim, compensation. So here we're getting into the different kind of claims. And if you looked on the examples, that would show through. So we'll play with that again later this afternoon, in the second hour in this afternoon. I also did Australia. I was going to show you that one. I'll just show you that one. I sort of wondered, well, what do British students know about Australia? What do they write about when they... So we get white settlement, former colonies, British Columbia and Southwest Australia, the Enlightenment, Orobians, southwest of Australia, mission in Australia, mission in Australia. So quite a specific sort of perspective coming through. But on page 4 of your handout, you'll see all the information that you can get through Sketch Engine about the distribution of Australia in British undergrad, in British student writing. I thought the text level was quite interesting. Can you sort of summarize what those numbers tell us about the text level, about the use of the term Australia in student writing in Britain?
First and second year.
So in first year, there are 16 instances. In second year, there are 29. In third year, there are 56. In fourth year, 103. We've only got 200 and something, 204 hits. So it gives you the frequency in that first column, and then the second column where it says relative percent, that's the relative frequency, because the size of the different groups, in terms of the level, the sizes are pretty much the same, but in terms of the disciplines, the number of assignments in physics is quite different from the number of assignments in engineering. So it's sort of evened out to be a percentage. So what you see from the level thing is that there's more written about Australia with each year of study. It's sort of a specialist area of academic writing. That's right. Which I thought was a bit sad when I first looked at it, but at least it's there. And then I thought, well, let's look and see what happens to Britain. So I put Britain in, and it was the opposite. They write much more about Britain in first year and increasingly less as it goes up. So what you can do is you can just let the computer throw things up and look for patterns and do sort of corpus-driven research where the computer shows up patterns that you wouldn't have thought to look for that might turn out to be quite interesting. You might want, there's a lot of talk about globalization in universities, so you might want to look at all the different countries that are mentioned, who mentions them, where is there writing about different countries in university student writing. You could explore that in the corpus if you were interested. So the other things that you notice are that Australia is mentioned most frequently in social sciences, in fourth year essays, but it is found across disciplines, across years, and across genre. It collocates most strongly with Zealand, not with New, but with Zealand, which is New Zealand. And I've given you some examples of that. And you can read through and get a sort of sense of a perception of Australia from British student writing. So you get a sense of Australia as a developed, industrialized, advanced nation, positive perception. You get a sense of Australia being engaged economically and politically with Asia, and particularly with Japan, fair representation. And you get a sense of Australia as being a country with agriculture, with pigs, wine, and whaling. Is that a good representation? But the numbers here are very small. I mean, you've only got 204 hits. For most things that you would be looking for, you'd have 1,000 or so hits, and you would be able to make more substantial and better evidence generalizations. But that's just an example of how you can explore the corpus in terms of specific items that you might be interested in. So we interviewed all the tutors, and we investigated the disciplinary contexts. We collected the assignments, and we developed this digital corpus. And then the third stage was to develop a genre classification, because we wanted to know what types of writing were being used in the different levels and disciplines. So in order to do that, we read the assignments. Hilary, Nessie, and myself read the 2,761 assignments. And we... 6.5 million words. It was wonderful. It was really empowering to see what people write across the university. It's absolutely fascinating. We felt very privileged to be able to do that. And we grouped them together. Now, some of them were quite easy to group. If you had a nursing patient case note reports, if you had 20, 30, 40 of those, they were all obviously doing the same thing with the same structure. Those were easily groupable into one genre. Others of them took a lot more time, and we spent a lot of time going backwards and forwards and thinking, well, no, but this is not the purpose of this assignment. How is it fitting in? What are the stages of... We used Jim Martin's definition of genre as a staged which I'm sure you're more familiar with than I am. This is staged, goal-oriented social process through which subjects live their lives. So we were looking for the goal orientation. We were trying to figure out what is the purpose of university student writing, and we were looking at the stages. What differentiates these assignments from those assignments in terms of their staging? And then we grouped those that were similar. So we grouped those with similar purposes and similar structure, and then we gave them a name. So the name, as I'm sure you know, people will call anything an essay or a report, which may be similar. Even within the department, people will use different names for the same type of assignment. So these were our names. So this is a grounded approach to the classification. What we were wanting was a broad picture of university writing. So there have been lots of very good studies, genre studies of writing within specific disciplines, but we wanted something that would go across the whole university and allow us to classify the whole corpus. So we looked for similarities. So for instance, a book review in history, basically what you have to do is to describe what's in the book and evaluate it from a disciplinary perspective, from the perspective of a historian. Product evaluation in engineering, you might have to look at a piece of equipment to describe it, how it works, and then evaluate it from an engineering perspective. So we thought those are basically doing the same sort of things. So those were the kind of generalizations that we were looking for across disciplines and across the university. And that genre family we called a critique genre family. As I say, we used Martin's definition of genre, and so for us a genre family is a group of genre from across disciplines with a similar purpose and staging. Some people would say that all the genre in history form a genre family, and that's not the sort of genre family that we're interested in. We're interested in the ones that have similar purpose and staging. And we came up with 13 genre families, which seemed like a manageable number. So we've got hundreds of genre, and this summer we're going to put in all the genre labels onto the corpus as well. But at the moment there are just the genre families on the corpus, and there were 13 of these. Some of these labels are influenced by different approaches. So for instance, empathy writing. Whoops, didn't mean to do that. Empathy writing is a term that comes from the academic literacies tradition of research on academic writing. And is that a term that you know? No. This is writing where you're writing for a non-academic audience. So the kind of assignments would be things like they had to do a poster for our local transport museum, or you had to respond in a teenage magazine to a health query from in a letter sort of format as a health professional, or you had to do an expert brief for journalists on an incident that had happened in agriculture. So you're writing for a non-academic audience, but using your disciplinary expertise. Some of these are obviously influenced by systemic functional linguistics genres, and others we've just taken names from the disciplines, where, like case study and problem question, where we needed a name. So talk a little bit about these genre families and how it worked. So on the right-hand side here, you have some examples of assignment questions, titles of assignments. Carefully evaluate the methods used by Ken Price in his study Endless Pressure. But we didn't classify on the grounds of the title. We actually read the assignment to see what it was about and what the response was like. That was an example of a research methods critique, because this was in sociology. The students had to critique the methods used in this study, and that was a very common assignment across a number of disciplines. The second one, a book review, review of the bell curve, intelligence and class structure in American life. But remember, this would be from the perspective of sociology. So you had two critique genre. These are examples of two different critique genre, which would be labeled in the corpus as members of the critique genre family. Essays. Why do some students have children? Why do some women? Why do some women have children? Why do some women not do so? Looks like it might be setting up a discussion genre, but actually in the way it was answered as an exposition, so we classified it as an exposition, and there were also discussion genre. So to go back to the critique genre, critiques are quite similar to case studies, but from our interviews and from looking at the assignment texts, the distinguishing feature that we identified is that for a case study, there has to be recommendations for future practice. So a business case study, which is a typical example, would have suggestions, would have strong recommendations for the way forward in terms of analysis of the case. A patient study, case study would have a diagnosis and recommendations for further treatment. So that was the difference between a case study and a critique in our classification. In terms of essays and explanations, explanations for us are non-persuasive. They're not expected to be original perspectives on something. Or what we actually said for essays, we said that these are argumentative essays and students are expected to develop a personal stance. It's not necessarily original in the sense of being the first person to ever say it, but the two students writing the same essay would have different perspectives. They might draw on different evidence, come to different conclusions, and that was what was expected in an essay. In an explanation, it's expected that the conclusions or the sort of summary of the explanation would not differ radically from student to student. Research reports. So these are the sort of where you have a substantial development of a research question and a contribution to the literature. And these were differentiated from lab reports, from which we've called methodology recounts, which focus on the results and the methods and the results. Proposals. Here's a research proposal that was written for a funding council. And proposals would be different from design specifications, because design specifications are very detailed plans of how to do something that could be carried out by anybody. Proposals are persuasive in order to get funding to have a research idea accepted or whatever. And narrative recounts, these were fun. This is a typical first-year ethnography type of assignment where you send students out and tell them to take notes of what they see. So they had to go and sit in a bookshop and just write down, you know, 2 people entered, 1 took up a book, they talked to each other, they did this, they did that. A very detailed account of what happened. And then they reflect on the significance of it. And a library, that was that was just in sociology and anthropology, those kind of disciplines. The library search was found across disciplines in terms of students had to explain how they'd done a library search for a project, what they'd done, which indexes they'd accessed in detail to sort of recount the steps of their library search and then reflect on it. So does that kind of make sense? Yeah, good. So then that allows us to compare the genre used across disciplines. And you know what we find is that in history, you know, they've written essays all the way through school, and at university they just continue, and most of their assignments are still essays. In sociology, they're branching out, particularly in the research area, in terms of developing research techniques for the social sciences. But in engineering, the challenge of writing in different genre is the biggest, and that's the same for many of these sciences. So they're not doing essay after essay after essay where they can learn and develop and improve. With each assignment for some of them, it was a new genre and a new challenge in terms of the type of writing, the purpose, the structure, and what it would be like. So this, having classified all the assignments in terms of genre family, allows us to compare across disciplines in terms of one genre family. So instead of it comparing, you know, essays with design proposals, which really doesn't make any sense, you can compare essays with essays, and you can compare design proposals with other proposals or whatever. So for instance, here's an example from chemistry, just to give you an idea of what the writing's like. 4 sets of boiling tubes were prepared as described below. And you can see the typical features of scientific methods. The attention to detail, the specificity, the lack of the first person, the numbers, the reference as below. These are all very typical features of writing in chemistry. compare that to psychology. Very different style. It's all one paragraph. Very much purposive in order to do this, to check the assumptions, to more fully investigate. A lot of technical language, an assumption that you don't need to explain why you're using MANOVAs, why you're using t-tests, but that would be the appropriate thing to do. Very much a hard discipline in that sense, that you don't need to justify and explain, and investigating, you know, groups of behavior in groups, often university students. And then this one, which I kind of like, this is from Corpus linguistics, and the same, you know, segment of a genre, but I decided to use ant conch. I decided to first build a word because I felt it would be adequate. Very different language. And when I took this back to the tutors, they said, oh, well, yes, that is what they do. And we do want to know that they've made up their own minds and that, you know, this is what they, that it's not, they haven't borrowed a methodology from someone else, that they've kind of figured it out for themselves. But we would quite like them to write perhaps a bit tighter and, you know, perhaps less sort of feeling and deciding and more justification. But when I looked at, do you know John Swale's work on research genre? He describes corpus linguistics as methodologies as intuitive and largely trial and error. So if he says that, you know, this is exactly what she's doing, isn't it? Is trying things out and see, and this is what we'll be doing this afternoon. I can't give you a formula that'll, you know, help you find exactly what you want. You have to just explore the corpus, have an idea of what's there, where you might want to go, and use your intuitions and your own kind of trial and error. So as I say, having the genres classified allows us to compare across. The other thing, and I'm just going to stop in a minute, the other thing that you need to know about the corpus is that because we didn't collect by genre families, we collected by years of study and disciplinary groups, the number of instances of each genre is quite significantly different. So there are most essays and fewest literature surveys. But having said that, of those literature surveys, they're from 18 different disciplines. You know, so we've still got they're from all 4 disciplinary groups and all 4 levels of study. So we've still got a reasonable spread of those. Literature surveys, I don't think I talked about those. There are sort of 6 or 7 different genres in literature surveys. We included anthologies, annotated bibliographies, literature, the literature review section of a thesis, which was sometimes submitted as an assignment, that kind of thing. There are about 5 or 6 different genres in there. So I think I'll stop there, because what I've done is to sort of explain the project and the corpus and what we did and why we did it and how we did it. And we'll have a little break, and then after that I'll show you some more explorations of it.